We are, as always, glad to have our state representatives and state senator with us this morning, and a good crowd of other dignitaries in our audience this morning, and we appreciate you all being here. This morning we've got, I'll introduce our guest, Senator Jack Johnson from the 23rd District, representing all of Williamson County. Representative Charles Sargent, 61st District Representative. Mr. Glen Casada, Representative Glen Casada from the 63rd, and Representative Jeremy Durham from the 65th. And gentlemen, we're glad to have you all with us. I'd like to take each of you to take about 3 to 5 and just talk a little bit about what is at the top of your priority list this week and how that's looking. And Jack, if we could, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, good morning. It's great to be back with you, and I want to thank the chamber and all the folks for the luncheon last week, I guess it was. What a great turnout we had at the factory, and a big crowd there, and somewhat of an abbreviated version of this, but
right.
And I'm sure all those folks are at home watching right now, since we told them that we'd be on doing this. But anyway, we appreciate the avenue, the opportunity to do it. Dave has mentioned this several times, and I absolutely concur that this is invaluable for us to be able to take more than just a 15-second soundbite or a brief quote in the newspaper to be able to talk about some of these issues more in depth than sometimes they get covered in traditional media. So it's a tremendous. We try to communicate and reach out to our constituents with emails, and we do town hall meetings and things of that nature. So any opportunity we have to spend a little more time to flesh out some of these things is extremely valuable. So special thanks to Dave, you and the chamber, and all the folks who make this possible. Well, I don't want to talk on all the big topics because there's 4 of us, but I'll touch on a couple I think that we'll have coming up this week. One of the conversations we're having in the Senate Commerce Committee, which I have the honor of chairing, are ways to mitigate or somehow repel the impacts of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act in the state of Tennessee. And it's really interesting. I spent a good bit of time this weekend with the help of my staff researching some of the constitutional aspects. You know, there's a lot of conversations about the Supremacy Clause in the United States Constitution, and actually how much authority do we as a state have in order to try to push back on some of these aspects of what we generally consider to be, well, not generally, I think overwhelmingly consider to be a horrible law on the federal level with regards to health care. And a number of pieces of legislation have been filed in the General Assembly to nullify or to interpose. Or Jeremy's the only lawyer among our delegation, but I tell you this: after a few years in the General Assembly, I think you should be entitled to at least an honorary law degree, because you spend a lot of time reading law and studying the Constitution and so forth. And you know, again, I think I speak for most members of the General Assembly when we feel like that net on the whole. The Affordable Care Act is already having some negative implications with regards to health care in Tennessee. And like I said, a number of bills that have been sponsored and not only in Tennessee, but in other states as well, to try to push back. So it's an interesting kind of constitutional conversation. And I wish that we probably had more authority as a state to push back on not just the health care law, but other aspects where the federal government keeps exerting more and more influence on us as a state, in direct contradiction, I believe, to the intentions of the framers with regards to the 10th Amendment and state sovereignty. So I could get on a soapbox there, but just know we're looking at as many ways as we possibly can to try to push back on the health care law. There are 2 of those bills on the Senate Commerce calendar for tomorrow. We'll meet, I believe it's at 1:30, I think is when the Senate Commerce Committee meets. So we're going to have some expert testimony from some attorneys and some folks who believe that we have more authority as a state, and then some who believe that in fact the Supremacy Clause will prevent us from doing some of that. So right. That's something that's going to be high on our calendar this week.
We'll circle back around and talk a little bit more about that here in just a few minutes. I promised that we would try to understand the Medicaid expansion issues a little better, and we'll try to do that. Charles?
Well, thank you, Jack, for saying what you said on the affordable health care. I'm going to follow up on that and thank the Chamber for the luncheon last Tuesday and for this meeting we always have on the fourth Monday of the month. I've always looked forward to it, and we always have a good crowd, and we can, like Jack said, instead of just a 5 or 10-second soundbite. I'm totally against the Affordable Health Care Act, the Obamacare, whatever you like, however you like to call it. Some people are out there saying I'm for it. Most people that know me well enough, especially when it comes to the fiscal side of that act. Right now, this year, our budget's about $120 million under-collected. In what we have in our budget, it's about $290 million of new revenues. Of that, we're putting $74 million this year into additional health care costs under our TennCare and everything that we have to do. If we had the Affordable Health Care Act in place, it would cost us somewhere in the neighborhood between $150 to $225 million more. So if I just use the average of $175 million more plus the 75 we're putting in, that's $250 million. That would eat up most all of our increases. By doing it like that, we could not give money to schools or any other department. So financially, we just cannot even afford to even start looking at something like this. I know Jeremy has a bill, and I've signed on to the bill. That's out of committee as far as that's concerned. So, this is something that is so expensive that, they're saying, well, the government will pay for it for the first 3 years. But after 3 years, it would eat up every bit of our increase that we would have. And, it would leave no additional money for county schools, corrections, TDOT, and things of that nature. So, it's something we have to be very, totally against, and, really watch it very closely.
Glenn?
Yeah. Two things that I'm working on, and the first one is called lawsuit lending. The Senate passed that legislation out without a whimper. Jack led that charge and did a good job in the Senate. We've got into a little battle in the House, but lawsuit lending, in essence, is investors pulling money together, and I started to use the word lending, but that's not actually the word they want to use. It's actually not lending, but this money is taken by those who are in the middle of a lawsuit. And there are times when this action is needed, but there are times when this action causes lawsuits to go on much longer than they need to be. And they're a burden upon the businesses of our state. And so the legislature, under the leadership of Jack Johnson and his bill, and trying to get this through the House, would put limits, put regulations on lawsuit lending. And it's a good thing for business, and it's a good thing for commerce. So I'm proud to be part of that. And we did get it out of full committee this week, and it will go on to, I think, Charles's committee this week. Charles, does that sound right? Okay. Yep. So that's the first thing that proud to be working. The other thing that hasn't made the news yet, and it surprises me, is this thing, a resolution calling for the Convention of the States for a balanced budget. Right now, 20 states are calling for a constitutional convention for a balanced budget amendment in our U.S. Constitution. The reason's obvious. Our federal government is on the precipice of just bankrupting this country. And so Tennessee will be state number 22 if it passes in the next week or two. 34 states, if they come together and call for a constitutional convention, it will be held. If 38 states pass what comes out of the convention, it becomes a constitutional amendment. And so I think this is time for this to happen to keep our country from an economic basket case. So proud of putting that together. Dennis Powers has the bill, and Beth Harwell has come on board, and we're going to push this through the House starting probably this week. So that should make news. So be looking for that. And thank you for having us, Dave. I appreciate this. This is a great opportunity to say hi and interface on things of concern to you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much. Jeremy Durham.
Well, first of all, just like these guys, I appreciate the continued commitment of the Chamber to give us a forum where we can interact with any constituent who wants to come up here and talk to us. Also want to just tell you that all four of us, no matter what week it is, we're always trying to focus on ways to keep small businesses protected from unnecessary red tape, always trying to keep taxes as low as possible, making sure that our schools are as good as they can be, just trying to make Williamson County the best they can be. And I think we're all on the same page on almost every single topic. Charles mentioned the Affordable Care Act. I do have a bill that will be on the House floor tonight that deals with, when you say the Affordable Care Act, it's such a complicated thing. You know, I'll try to fly from 30,000 feet. The individual mandate, we can't do anything about it. What states can do pursuant to NFIB versus Sebelius, the Tennessee Supreme Court allowed us to not participate in the Medicaid expansion if we wanted to. The original bill said that every state had to increase their Medicaid rolls, what we call TennCare in Tennessee, to 138% of the federal poverty line. Well, I feel like with the politics in Nashville, it will be very difficult to ever see that happen if that legislation had to pass like a normal bill, and there was no way for anyone to put it in our state budget. So that is what we will vote on tonight. I want to thank Jack. It was in his committee in Commerce. He made sure it came out 7-2 one time, and it only had 2 against it the second time. And Jack actually came over to a House committee and testified for me because there was questions about it, because there was some kind of issue about the terminology, so they put it back in Commerce. But he got it right back out of there and even came over and testified on the House side, which is not very conventional, but he did it, and I appreciate it. Charles, it was in House Finance Committee, and he made sure it got out of there. I really appreciate him. A lot of people were curious, you know, what would happen in budget sub. A lot of times things like that have any kind of fiscal note will go behind the budget. Charles made sure that didn't happen. Glen, from day one, has made sure that behind the scenes he gave me any help possible to make sure that this bill would move forward. The lowest, I believe it's the lowest percentage of people in the state. Williamson County has the lowest percentage that would actually benefit if we did this, and it would still cause all the budget problems that Charles mentioned. It would take money out of schools. It would take money out of roads. And the thing about it is the Affordable Care Act, it's the gift that keeps on giving. There's also an excise tax that basically, it's not just insurance companies, even state plans are subject to a certain tax. It's your percentage of all the insurance plans in the country. So even by expanding your TennCare rolls, you have to pay more tax. So it's just the gift that keeps on giving, and we need to make sure that we continue to take steps to protect our state from the ramifications of the Affordable Care Act. And I want to thank these guys for doing what they've done.
Let's stay on the Medicare, Medicaid issue just for a few more minutes. And in an effort to explain this in a way that I could understand, and hopefully our audience can understand, let me outline the way I understand the issues. And this is the way it's been presented in the media, which, as we all know, sometimes doesn't totally reflect the reality of the entire situation. But TennCare was established in 1994. In 2005, the costs were getting so badly out of control that Governor Bredesen hired consultants to examine it from all directions and see how it could be brought back under control. He ultimately decided to disenroll about 172,000 mostly childless adults, is the way I understood it. Adults that have no children were disenrolled from TennCare in 2005 as a result of that study. Now, another piece of the puzzle that appears to me to be fairly important is that even though these childless adults were not insured anymore, the hospitals were, by law, required to take care of them. And to take that one step further, the federal government partially reimbursed the hospitals for that care. Am I right so far? Everything's okay.
DSH payments, disproportionate share hospital payments.
Okay. Now, Obamacare cut out those payments to the hospitals.
Cut them 75%.
Okay. That was a detail I've missed. But so now, because under Obamacare, they assumed that these childless adults would be covered. But unless the governor decides to cover them, then they're kind of out in the cold, and the hospitals are not getting paid for that in any way, or much reduced way. And that's why I'm guessing we're seeing all the layoffs at the hospitals. Is that Am I drawing a correct conclusion there, or is that,
Well, the dish payment reductions have not yet gone into effect. So I don't think, unless there was they were anticipating the dish payments going to into effect, it wouldn't directly be tied to the dish payment reduction because it has not in fact happened yet.
okay. Well, that was kind of the train of thought that I gathered from all the coverage I saw on this. And, you know, we've got two pretty important constituencies, taxpayers on one side,
Sure.
and the hospital industry, which is also pretty important to this community, on the other side of the issue. Is that fairly accurate? Jack, you're over here looking like you're wanting to say something.
Well,
so
no,
take it from there.
I think that's a fair analysis, and one other critical component of this is under the Affordable Care Act, under Obamacare, this expansion of the Medicaid rolls. The first 3 years would be paid for supposedly by the federal government at 100%, and so the federal government, President Obama, would try to make a case for those states that he's trying to encourage to expand Medicaid. Oh, it's free money for the first 3 years, so you don't have to pay for any of it. It's just we're going to pay for all of the added expense for the first 3 years. And then after the first 3 years, it goes to a 90-10 split. Now, the typical Medicaid reimbursement rate is 2 to 1. So for every dollar the state of Tennessee puts in under the existing program, the federal government puts in $2. So the proposal is first 3 years, 100%, federal government picks up all the added expense. After that, it's 90-10. That's to Charles's point about even with a 90-10 split ratio, adding these people up to 138% of the federal poverty level, what it would do to our budget. And your analysis of the original TennCare program back in the mid-90s under Governor McWhorter is a great analogy because it had many similarities to what an expanded TennCare program would be. We have lived this in Tennessee, and it almost broke our back. It almost broke the state of Tennessee. It's what led to the income tax battle. It's what led to a 1% increase in the sales tax in Tennessee. That was all directly related to the expansion of TennCare, or the creation of TennCare, which was similar to a Medicaid expansion.
Okay.
So now your point about the hospitals and them laying off people is a very serious point. And I've used the analogy. There are small communities in Tennessee right now that with the reduction, 75% reduction of the dish payments and no Medicaid expansion, we're going to lose some small rural hospitals. There's just no doubt about it. There are folks that are now in Washington trying to restore those dish payments back to some of those smaller hospitals. So as Jeremy said, and I appreciate the kind words, I'm 100% in support of his bill, which simply says that if Governor Haslam did decide he wanted to expand Medicaid, he has to obtain a resolution from both chambers of the General Assembly. And I'm in complete support of that, and quite frankly, that's not going to happen given the current composition of the General Assembly. But we are all sympathetic to those families that are out there in small towns where they've got a hospital that's 5 minutes away right now. And as a result of this law, which we did not create, we had nothing to do with, but because of this disastrous train wreck, these families are now going to be an hour and a half away from a hospital. And that is not lost on us. And what the federal government should do is restore those dish payments so that we can save those hospitals rather than trying to put it back on our backs to get us to expand a Medicaid program with a federal government that's $17 trillion in debt. I do not think it's unreasonable. We say no to going into business with the federal government any more than we already have to right now.
Dave, let me comment. Sometimes you have to step back and see why you're in the trouble you're in. And so anytime you have a government-run or government-dictated health care plan where rates and payments and the market is at a minimum held in check, and in most cases the market is not allowed to compete, well, then all of a sudden you've got providers not being paid what they should be paid. You've got individuals not paying their fair share, if you will. They're paying, what, $5 for a copay, and that's all you have to pay. I mean, you have to take ownership of your own health care. And then concurrently, you've got the smaller hospitals in the small communities that are not being supported by their local population. People in Fayette County, Tennessee are driving to Memphis for various reasons. And so you've got all these factors that have come into play. And so the solution to our healthcare problem in this country is what Congressman Blackburn has proposed, which is bring market forces back into healthcare. That will make a system that works and is successful.
Let me say one thing.
Go ahead.
Your statistics were correct, but let me use percentages. Back then, our health care cost was running about 27% of the state budget. Today, it's 31% of the state budget. If we continue, and we're at 10K right now is at $10.4 billion. It's a third, or 31% of our total budget. If we keep on going and get this up to 35, 36, 37%, well, you know, I'm a big one that wants to decrease the Hall tax. Well, I can see that being increased. You know, we just fiscally and financially, we cannot afford to do that. So, you know, and I look at it maybe differently. I know everything's not numbers and everything, but I have to make it work in the budget.
Right.
And when I turn around and say, folks, we're going to do this, but it's going to cost you sales tax dollars, increase in sales tax, increase in health care premiums, increase in this. When I lay it like that, people say, I don't want to do that. Okay? And when we're looking at it, even when he worked it out, and we have people say 200 or 300% of poverty level, well, they may have a $2,500 deductible, $5,000 deductible. The same group of people that we're giving insurance to can't afford the first $2,500 or $5,000. So where are they going to go? They're going to go right back to the emergency room. So we haven't solved the problem, the basic problem he wanted to solve. And financially, it could bankrupt the state of Tennessee.
So what's the answer?
Well, I think if they set it up and let the market work, we could have come out with a program. If you wanted to just say everyone that was uninsurable, if you go back to the 45 million people they talked about that had no insurance, basically, if you break that number down, 15, about a third of them, it's not exact, but a third were illegal aliens here in this country. 1/3 were uninsurable, so about another 15 million. The other 15 million just didn't want to buy insurance. Mm-hmm. So if you want to tackle the problem and figured out a way to cover the 15 million uninsurable people, you could have managed that and you could have worked that in. But just to say that we're going to give everyone insurance, it doesn't work. And if you think your premiums are large today and we haven't seen the increases, because now, I'll use the Blue Cross Blue Shield for an example, they are taking in people that are uninsurable today. Well, that's going to have to be made when your loss history starts coming in. It's going to have higher premiums. You don't have a choice.
Right.
I mean, you know the uninsured is uninsured for a reason, and their medical benefits are going to be more expensive. Mm-hmm. So everyone else's premium is going to have to be raised to cover that.
Right.
So when you look at it, if you're trying to solve a problem, they try to solve a universal problem when they only need to solve a problem for 15 million people. And that's what they've done. I mean, if you look at the bottom line, and it will bankrupt the federal government, and we're not going to let it happen to the state of Tennessee.
One thing that we're not talking about is something the federal government does constantly. They give short-term funds, or they will use one rate and then they'll change the rules. President Obama himself has already mentioned the idea of a blended matching rate, which would take the Medicaid expansion population with the enhanced matching rate that we're talking about, 100% for 3 years, 90. It eventually goes down to 90% in 2020. Well, right now, our regular matching rate is 2-to-1 for adults and 3-to-1 for children. Well, if that gets blended, I mean, we are in a very precarious financial situation. We're not talking about the same ballpark of numbers that Charles has just mentioned. We are in a 2005 style position. And just to put a little bit more credibility with this argument, a Tennessee Hospital Association poll with them asking the questions. This is an organization that openly supports Medicaid expansion. 4 in 10 people polled believed that the federal government would change the matching formula. That is with them asking the question. It was 39% of people believe the federal government would change the matching formula. So that's extremely important to keep in mind. I understand that the hospitals are not in a very good position, but the federal government has created this mess, and it should be up to them to fix it. We should not put Tennessee taxpayers at risk because of something the Obama administration has done.
Okay, I see our audience's eyes glazing over. Even though I've looked at it enough to sort of understand what we're talking about. One more question. Is Tennessee the only state in this situation, or is it something that the federal government's going to have to deal with nationwide?
I think roughly half of the states have expanded in that.
About half now.
Have expanded their Medicaid population.
Okay,
so half haven't.
So we're not the only one in this
No.
boat. Good.
Not at all.
Good. Well, then there is some hope that something might get done in Washington that will help
Hold your breath.
resolve this. Great. Let's move on to some of the other very important things going on in the on Capitol Hill. One, could someone give us an update on the wine and grocery stores in 2 minutes or less? Where are we there?
The bill has passed the Senate, the bill has passed the House. There are some small differences between the two bills. We'll send the House bill version over to the Senate. They'll either concur in what we passed. If they do not concur, then it will go to a conference committee made up of the House and Senate members. That conference committee will come out with a recommendation, and that goes to an up or down vote. There's no amendments allowed, there's no changes allowed, or anything of that nature. So it'll be an up and down vote. So,
Okay.
I mean, basically, real simple. I think that's where it.
And
It's a done deal.
Senator Ketron has indicated, I believe, unless something has changed, that he is going to agree to the House changes on the Senate floor. So I'm not sure if that'll be this week or not. But when that, the House and Senate have to pass an identical version of the bill in order for it to go to the governor for his signature. So the last to pass it, which in this case was the House, they passed a different version. So they send that version over to us, and then, as Charles said, the motion is to concur or non-concur, and I expect Senator Ketron to move to concur with the House version of the bill. We will pass that, 17 or more votes, and now we've passed the identical bill, and it'll go to the governor for his signature. And I expect that to happen.
We're not crazy about every provision of the bill.
It's a horrible bill.
We're going to have to come back and try to get more. Will we have a referendum on wine and grocery stores? Yes. 20% mandatory markup, that's the government just setting an arbitrary markup. Right now, that's over wholesale wine prices. Right now, though, it's roughly, in a liquor store, it's probably in the 40% markup. The price, there will be a little bit of a consumer advantage. It won't be what we wanted. You won't see it on shelves until 2016, even if we pass a referendum in November of 2014. It is not a perfect bill, but there were just so many political factors in play. Everyone up here, I mean, I know in the House we were all of us, I think we're co-sponsors of the bill, just a pure version. Just let people vote on wine and grocery stores. All of us supported that. But we were not about to come back here again and let the wheels fall off this bill yet again. So we got the best thing we could. It's not perfect. As you learn the details, we're not going to be as crazy about it as just the idea of wine and grocery stores. But we wanted something to pass. I don't know that we got a touchdown, but we got a first down, and we can keep moving the ball down the field. That's the way I feel about it.
Good enough.
Dave, in the House, the vote was
Great.
71-15, and let there be a credit to Beth and the sponsors of the bill. They were able to craft something together that initially we weren't sure we had 50 votes for in the House. And the sponsors of the bill and Beth and several folks working with members, trying to get as many votes as we could, we've got 71, which was an impressive number.
Okay. Staying on somewhat more popular or populist subjects, I was offended to open my paper recently and see that UT is having another sex week this week. and even more offended that some of the student fees are being used to pay for this. And then when I saw the agenda, some of which I'm not going to read because of just pure offensive things here, but gender theory, porn then and now, sex trivia and pizza, sexploration, Tennessee politics and policy is one of the subjects. The Lambda drag show.
You're making Charles blush.
What's going on when our signature state university is promoting stuff like that?
I mean, I signed that resolution to defund it. I don't know where it is. Charles would probably know better. Maybe not.
No, there's a resolution out there to defund it. I don't know where it is right at this point in time. I know it's not in finance. And there's another bill, a resolution coming up this week. I heard on the on TV or the radio this weekend. I mean, this is something we've tried to stop, and the student fees are somewhat out of our control, but we're going to do something that, because every year for the last 3 years this has come up, and yeah, it's getting ridiculous. It really is. That's all I can say. It's embarrassing. Do you even have to mention this today? I mean,
Dave, to your point, there is a certain decorum that should be adhered to in public. And I don't care if you're 20 or if you're 22, you're an adult, and you need to act according like an adult. And it is an embarrassment to the state. I know 2 representatives have a resolution, and Charles is correct. At this point, we haven't found anything legally short of passing a law saying, which is not really, not the recommended course. So it's being researched what we as a General Assembly can do, but it's not proper behavior for young adults in our state.
Right.
And last thing I'll say, Senator Stacey Campfield, who, let's just say, is not afraid of voicing his opinion on some different things. The Knoxville campus is in his district.
Right.
And he has led the charge in years past and continues to do something about this, and we're all very supportive of his efforts, whatever that ends up being.
Well, I could say a lot more, but I think we probably spent plenty of time on that subject, but I was quite surprised to see that again this year. Moving on to maybe something that affects us more on a local level, and we have in the audience with us Mayor Ken Moore, and I've picked up that the Guns in Parks bill is not really very popular with our local officials. Dr. Moore, could you step up to the podium and maybe give a man on the streets version of how you see this bill and what you think should be done, and let our representatives respond?
Sure, and I'm glad to address that as far as what we feel at the city, and certainly appreciate everybody being out this morning. And we have had discussions with our legislative delegation with our concerns about having guns in parks. And if you remember, the General Assembly gave us the option to opt out, I guess about 3 or 4 years ago, and we had a 6-2 vote at our board meeting to opt out. We continue to have a lot of concern about having guns in parks, since in Williamson County there are so many of our parks that have school functions on them. So I understand the bill continues to move along in the General Assembly, and I was briefly mentioning to Representative Sargent this morning that maybe we could explore another way for us to be able to opt out if we could show that a significant percentage of our parks are occupied by children the bulk of the time. I think you create a real difficult situation just to blanket across the board to say, well, everybody can carry their guns in the park. And so maybe there's some way we can opt out in Williamson County and in Franklin, since they are so heavily used by children. You just go to, my wife talked to me about the park over the weekend. Just there was no parking in Pinkerton Park. It was all kids.
Gentlemen, how would you respond?
Actually, there were two issues, local issues that I was concerned enough about to poll my district last week. And to be fair, you know, I did say concealed carry permit holders, but it was 59% in favor, 40% against in my district. Not going to co-sponsor the bill because my local elected officials. It's not something we brought. There's a lot of compelling reasons on the other side. I think it will ultimately actually cost Williamson County taxpayers money. But I literally polled my district, 59% in favor, 40% against, and that's why I'm going to vote yes. If we can make it for something that the local governments can be agreeable to, then hopefully we can make it something they can live with. But as is, it's not going to be popular in this room, but I have to be a yes.
Yeah, I'd be curious, your method of polling your district.
Couple of things, Dave. I'll chime in on this. One, and Jeremy brought it up, but a very important aspect of this is we say guns in parks. We're talking about carry permit holders, people who have gone through the process with the state of Tennessee, FBI background check, day-long safety course, proven their proficiency with a weapon. That's who we're talking about. There are roughly 400,000 people in the state of Tennessee who have gone through that process to obtain a handgun carry permit. That's who we're talking about. You know, it's interesting. I agree. I haven't done a poll. Jeremy shared his poll results with me. I have not done a poll, but just anecdotally from the emails and phone calls and talking to people, other people have polled this issue, and I do surmise that probably a sizable majority would be in favor of this. I've got core convictions. We all do. We talk about our kind of philosophical filters that we have to go through in terms of deciding how we vote and how we handle legislation. In this instance, my personal core conviction is that if you are a handgun carry permit holder, I believe that you should pretty much be allowed to carry a weapon with some restrictions. The argument that I heard in the Senate was this is a constitutional right. The Tennessee state constitution says that gun laws will be regulated by the state. Now, we have opted to give some of that authority to local governments, as we did in 2009 with that version of the bill. But my core convictions are that if you're a handgun carry permit holder, you should be able to carry your weapon. I believe that my district overwhelmingly supports that as well. I do have another core conviction that we've talked about, and that is that local control is very important. And I won't mention the name, I had a conversation over the weekend with a prominent local official here in municipal government over the weekend, and we were having this conversation. I've got core conviction competing core conviction. And at the end of the day, in the Tennessee State Senate, it was a 26-7 vote. It wasn't even close. And so if my personal core convictions arrive to a particular level, and I believe that my district supports that, then that ends up trumping another core conviction. I don't know how else to dictate it. Having said all of that, we have to address whether it's philosophical or just the fact that you can't have conflicting laws in the code. And that is with regards to parks that are used by schools. And that is the element of this that must be addressed, or the law will be challenged. And if it's conflicting, if you say over here on one side you can do it, and then another part of the code you say you can't, then it ends up going before a judge. And none of us, no disrespect to our judges, none of us want to, Mr. Westbrook, none of us want this to be handed over to a judge. This is a matter that should be decided by the policymakers of the state of Tennessee. And that's where I do expect, with regards to parks that are being used by schools, to end up being addressed before we pass something in a final form.
And I agree with both these gentlemen. They've articulated well where I am as well. And let's be sure. I wish we could wave a wand and there was no guns. But when we had this debate of carry permits some 12 years ago, guns in restaurants some 5 years ago, guns are already there. Where we are today is the law-abiding citizens adhere to the lawbreakers don't adhere to the law. So guns are everywhere, and right now in places where guns are not allowed, only the law-abiding citizen doesn't have the gun. With all that said, the House is trying to come up with something that we can work with our local officials on. And one of those that we're working on is if a park is used by a school at any time of the year, it is a school park, and we would put it under the federal guidelines of what parks are as schools. So that's something we're working on in the House. Don't have the votes today, but that's kind of something I've taken up. So that's where we are on that, Dave. Thank you.
Appreciate the explanations and the color on that bill. numerous subjects that I could throw out, but I'd like to see our audience step up to the podium now and ask questions that are on your mind. If you've got something that's bothering you or concerning you, we'd like for you all to step up and talk. If you would, I'm going to ask one more question, and then if you would be making your way to the podium, I would appreciate it. Another bill that is going to affect our local municipalities is the bill, as I understand it, to not allow annexation. I'm not sure I've got this correct, but it's going to restrict annexation without a referendum of the voters living in the area being considered for annexation. This is just something I've never understood about annexation, but why do people that don't own property in the area, the people that rent a house or so forth, why do they get to vote in a referendum that that's being considered for the properties to be annexed? I totally messed that up, but just y'all could bail me out here. Tell us what's going on here.
The renter will not be able to vote. It will be the property owner.
Okay, that makes more sense to me.
As far as that, I just wanted to correct that.
Okay.
It would strictly be the property owner. And I want to correct another thing. We do have Judge Guffey out there sitting in the audience, so I want to recognize her as one of our judges.
Thank you. Glenn, Jeremy, Jack?
Only 3 states don't have vote by the people for annexation. 47 states do. I think it's a logical thing. I know in the past we tried to pull Williamson County out, and I was told that cannot be done legally this year. It kind of took me by surprise. So it looks like we'll have an up or down vote on will the people vote on being annexed or not. It could be a referendum as small as one person. If a town wants to take a parcel of land, the referendum could be one person. And you know, I'm open to hear what our cities think on that type of law, but it seems 47 other states do it. It empowers the people and empowers the voters, and I don't think it would affect annexation if one parcel or 2 parcels or 10 parcels want to be annexed. Those 10 or 2 or 1 individual would vote.
I can understand.
I want to first say on the record that this is not something that any of us thought was enough of a problem to bring a bill. This is things that were happening over this addresses problems that were happening in Ooltewah. I'm open to something that might, require a supermajority of the county commission or something like that. But I sympathize with someone who bought property thinking one thing and they don't want the rules changed in the middle of the game. And if it's just a simple yes or no on do people have the right to vote whether or not their property gets annexed into a city, I have to vote yes. I know I'm a co-sponsor, Glenn. You probably are. So if it's as simple as that, that's fine. If we can, that's the way I would vote. Now, I'm open to working with our local governments if there's something that might help them. That's something we need to look at. But if it's as simple as do people get the right to vote on whether or not their property is annexed, if it's that simple, I have to be a yes.
Okay. Charles?
We had a moratorium last year. Tried to exclude Williamson County, and there was about 15 or 17 counties that wanted out. The bill will be on it's House Bill 590. It'll be on the floor tonight, and I project that bill will go through fairly easy.
Okay.
And we've tried to work with the sponsors. I've tried diligently to work with the sponsors, but there's a problem come out of Ooltewah, Tennessee, and a couple of other areas, so annexation probably is going to go through just the way it is, unless the Senate does something a little different.
Okay, very good, Jack.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that in my 7 years in the state Senate, I've never had one constituent complaint about annexation in Williamson County, and we've been over kind of the history of Chapter 1101 and how that was put into place with urban growth boundaries and this whole fight that took place back in the 90s, I guess it was, and the tiny towns, kind of issue. These guys have nailed it. It's not been a problem. To my knowledge, it's not been a problem here in Williamson County with the municipalities in the county and working within those urban growth boundaries. And I know that significant resources have been spent to provide infrastructure to areas that are up to the current lines going into possible expansion into the urban growth boundaries. This is a matter that over the last 2 or 3 years, though, because of a couple of problems in parts of the state, this legislation has really gotten traction and it's really gotten legs. I would still like to see, and it may not be possible, but I would like to see some way to, for those counties where it's not a problem, where they're working well and it hasn't been an issue, to figure out some way to try to protect aspects of 1101 and the urban growth boundaries for those counties in which it's not a problem, but also be able to address the issues where it's been abused. And how that happens, I don't know. The Senate sponsor of the bill is Bo Watson. He's a good friend. We've had conversations. He has not put the bill on notice. I'm on the committee, so I'll be up to my eyebrows in it. We'll be talking with our local folks here to see if we can figure out a way to try to accommodate areas where it's not a problem, but also be able to address it where it is.
See, and the prime example here in Williamson County between all our municipalities, but if you look at, even Spring Hill, you don't hear complaints. But if you look at Franklin and Brentwood, just in the last year, there was a senior citizen center that wanted to go inside their urban growth boundaries, and the city did not want to annex the property because it was not the right place, the infrastructure was not there, the water, sewer was not there. They made sound decisions, and it works when you have people making sound decisions. When you have other groups of local officials in other parts of the state don't make sound decisions, this is what we come up and they try to hurt everybody.
Goodness. Well, thanks for helping us understand that issue a little better. Looks like our audience is a little shy. Oh, Eric Stuckey, our Franklin City Administrator, is gonna.
I'd like to take a minute, especially since you're on the annexation topic, and talk real quick about a couple things. And thank you for being here and talking today about it. One of the things that's interesting that we heard about, and we always hear about at every chamber meeting pretty much, is the growth of this community and what a positive that is. One of the top 3 counties in the nation for job growth projected over the next 20 to 25 years. The population growth that we've all experienced. When you analyze the 2010 census, the tremendous growth that this community experienced, all but 100 people occurred in incorporated areas. That's because the cities can support the infrastructure that it takes to support growth. So if we're a pro-growth community, a pro-business chamber, you need to look at the basics of providing infrastructure that supports growth, sustainable growth over time. And that's what I think this annexation discussion is really more about than a simple property rights issue. It becomes a question of whose property rights, becomes a question of how we support growth and really the powerhouse of growth in this state, which is Williamson County. And I think it's a bigger issue than that. And I'll tell you, as somebody who's worked as a professional in local government for over 20 years in 3 different states, the 1101 setup is the best I've seen, by far. Because 15 years ago, counties and cities, along with the state, came to an agreement about how things were going to work in terms of what was going to be in those urban growth boundaries. And so you work within those parameters to make good decisions together. Our planning commissions between county and city talk to each other. That's way above what other folks do. And I just think we need to be careful. One of the things that's a real concern that I saw in the recent bill is there's a fiscal note that goes with certain items that come through for you to decide on. In this basic fiscal note, and I'm giving it shorthand, but it was basically, there is one, but we can't figure it out. It's too hard to figure out. Well, I did a little bit of math over the weekend, and I looked at our urban growth boundary, and I just said, cut it in half. Say half of it somehow doesn't come in because of changing the framework in the middle of the game. And then I assigned the lowest. We've done an analysis of land value across the city, looking at some other things we looked at. I took the lowest possible number, just land value. I didn't even take the improvements on it. And then I applied our tax rate, which is one of the lowest municipal tax rates in the state, and I came up with an annual impact of $2.4 million to the city of Franklin. Wasn't that hard. Just gives you at least a sense that there is some real impact. And to say that it's too hard to figure out, when I can just, with some rough math, say that could be multiple millions of dollars to our city based on what's been planned on for 15 years in development, I think that we ought to give us all some pause before we rush in and make the change because Ooltewah and Hamilton County can't get along, because it works here. And I think that's where leadership steps in to say, wait a second, especially when it's a competitive advantage that we do so well here because we work well together and we do the right things with infrastructure. I don't want to see us lose that because someplace else in the state they can't play well together. So I think that's something to really think about. I know that's not a question, but I did want to share those facts with you and at least give you something to chew on as this moves forward, and be careful about changing something that at least has worked well here. Representative Sargent highlighted some real examples where we don't just charge in and annex everything we possibly can. We try to be smart about it, and it is a very public process. The public is clearly heard in this process, and that played an important role in what we've gone through recently in the city of Franklin as well. So I just thought I'd share that perspective with you.
What I love about the show is there's always two sides to every story, no matter how obvious it appears.
Well, last year when we had the bill, we talked directly, and at first they were going to freeze all annexation, no matter if it was commercial, industrial, or residential. And working with everyone in the cities and the counties, we did not freeze. Can you imagine freezing commercial here in Williamson County? And, you know, we was able to get that taken out last year. Commercial and industrial was not, it was only residential as far as that. And Eric, I think you did an excellent job in explaining. The fiscal note we was looking at was strictly what it was going to be cost to hold a referendum.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think it needs to be a little broader than that.
We made the fiscal note that they have to hold a referendum on an election, so that's where the
scheduled election.
You schedule election, so there's not going to be a fiscal note.
Yeah.
And remember, it's only forced annexation. Annexation by consent.
By ordinance, yes.
Right. Annexation by consent would still be okay, and I believe commercial annexations will still be okay. I think
that's
it's just
not clear. That's what's confusing because there's multiple bills on this, and it's not clear to us on that. So we'd like some clarification. One of the things I'd also consider, the study committee that worked on this all last summer said we need more time because they realize the complexity of this issue. It is
they
not
also want to extend the moratorium another
well,
year.
That's better than just going ahead and making a decision if you're not sure of the implications. I guess I'd wonder why we wouldn't at least look at that so that we have a little more of a full picture. If they couldn't figure it out in that one study session, you know, are we okay making a decision without all of those elements being considered? So I just share that with you.
And Dave, to your point, we're fortunate if there's just two sides. Usually there's 4 or 5 sides, and then you really make a mistake when you leave one side out.
Granted, it's certainly a complex. Everything on Capitol Hill, I think, is complex, and I just enjoy trying to understand them. So.
Good luck if you figure it out. Let me know.
Joe, introduce yourself. And
good morning, gentlemen. Joe Jensen. I both live and work here in Franklin. In 2013, Senate Bill 894 and a companion bill, House Bill 1168, identified as the Genetically Engineered Labeling or Food Labeling Act, was before the legislature. I know it died in committee. I haven't seen any discussion of that issue coming back up this year, and I'd just like to hear if there's any legs to that, if we may hear about that in the future. Thanks.
GMOs, genetically modified organisms. This is where, you know, the manufacture of crops and things are cross-pollinated and genetically modified to make it more pest-resistant or drought-resistant and things of that nature. And there's been a movement among some out there that foods that are genetically modified in some form or fashion, that should be disclosed on the label. And so that folks know if they're eating something that is genetically modified. I had some folks in my office that support the legislation last week, I believe it was, that And they made the point to me that I thought was somewhat interesting, that I think they said 70 to 80% of pretty much everything you eat now, basically stuff that's grown by large corporate farms and things of that nature, is genetically modified. What you're going to run into in the state of Tennessee is that's a business mandate. I mean, you're telling businesses to do something, and now the other side will come back and say, well, they change their labels all the time. It won't cost them anything to just put, you know, a disclosure on there or a label. But you get a little bit of pushback from some in the General Assembly. So I don't expect anything, Joe, to happen this year. I think the conversation will continue out there, and I've heard very little from my district, a couple of folks, but and then certainly you today, talking about it. So we'll probably keep the conversation going, but we're always going to be very hesitant to tell businesses, absent some clear and compelling reason that they need to do something or force them to do something. And you get into things where different states have different, you know, some of this food may be grown and packaged in another state, so now they have to make a special label just for Tennessee, things coming into Tennessee, and so it gets complicated, and certainly would be a cost burden on those businesses. So, but if the health aspect of it rises to a level of concern to where it's warranted, then we'll certainly take a look at that.
And ever so briefly in the House, I try to keep my pulse on bills going through to see if they're going to be divisive within the House. And the Ag chairman told me that was the exact arguments in Ag committee, was that it would drive up food costs to a point, and it would be a mandate upon business. So that's why it never got any traction last year. But we will continue to talk and hear both sides and make our decision from there.
Judge Sharon Guffey, do you mind coming up and sharing a little bit with us? Since our audience is a little shy, I just like to call on folks. And the one thing that's been puzzling to me is the DCS, Department of Children's Services, has been in the media quite a bit lately. And for the most part, I look at those headlines and say, and we've got 3 minutes left, so this is not something we can get into in depth today, but maybe we can come back to it. Just wondering how much of an issue that is in Williamson County, and the Department of Children's Services issues, how they affect your court and our population here in the county.
Well, they affect it greatly. We work very closely with the Department of Children's Services, and they're in charge of investigating cases and working with our families and our children, and everything that y'all are doing in terms of funding for DCS would be greatly appreciated. I had a situation last weekend where I talked to a supervisor from DCS after one of our children had run from a DCS placement, and she called me, and this particular child actually had an ankle monitor on that could track where she was because she had a little history of running. And the supervisor, I asked her, I said, well, what about her monitor? Where you know where she is. Well, I can't check it because I'm not at home. I have to have my computer. So please, when Commissioner Henry says they need to come into the 21st century, they need to have internet access on their cell phones, first of all. Mm-hmm. I mean, right. That's pretty basic. So, you know, that's the type of situation that we run into with DCS. Everything that they do is so vitally important, and they do a great job when they can do it. When it works, I've always said when it works with DCS, it works beautifully. They can put a plan together for a child and a family, and it will be perfect. They will identify all the issues, but they have to have the people to do it, and they have to have the resources. And that's where y'all are so important.
Wish we had more time for you all to respond to that this morning, but let's try to maybe dig into that a little deeper next month. Again, my initial reaction was that's something that we don't worry about much in Williamson County, but I suspected I was wrong about that, and thank you, Judge Guffey, for helping us see the effects that's having here in Williamson County. Our time is up. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. This is a valuable time, and we appreciate your taking it out of your busy schedules to help us understand these issues. Thank you, audience, for being here, and look forward on the fourth Monday in March for for our next show here. If you have anything in particular you would like to see us address within reason, we would love to hear from you. So give us a call. Thank you very much. Look forward to next month.